In a small rural community outside Fort Worth, Texas, the holiday season of 2022 was supposed to bring joy. Families were decorating their homes, wrapping gifts, and counting down the days to Christmas. Children were writing letters, making wish lists, and falling asleep dreaming of what the morning might bring. It was the most wonderful time of the year, or at least it was supposed to be. But on November 30th, everything changed for one family, for one small town, and for an entire nation that would soon be watching with broken hearts. 7-year-old Athena Strand lived with her family in Paradise, Texas, a fitting name for the kind of quiet, peaceful community where people know their neighbors, where kids play outside without fear, and where the biggest concerns of the day are what to cook for dinner or whether it might rain before the weekend. It was exactly the kind of place where something like this was never supposed to happen. And yet it did. On that November afternoon, a delivery driver pulled up to the Strand family home. He was carrying a package, a Christmas gift that Athena's parents had ordered especially for her. It was a doll set from the You Can Be Anything collection, a present full of hope and possibility, chosen with love for a little girl who had her whole life ahead of her. The driver dropped off the package, returned to his van, and drove away. And Athena was never seen alive again. The hours that followed were every parent's worst nightmare. As the afternoon turned to evening and evening turned to night, Athena was nowhere to be found. Her family searched. Neighbors searched. Law enforcement was called, and soon an entire community was desperate for answers. 2 agonizing days passed before the worst was confirmed. Athena's body was discovered in a rural area not far from her home. She was 7 years old. The man responsible was Tanner Horner, 34 years old, a contracted delivery driver working for a logistics company during the busy holiday season. Horner was taken into custody, and what investigators uncovered in the days and weeks that followed painted a picture of a crime that was anything but accidental. According to prosecutors, Horner did not tell the truth when he first spoke to authorities. He claimed that during his delivery to the Strand residence, he had accidentally struck Athena with his van, and that in a moment of panic, events spiraled out of control. He wanted investigators to believe that this was a tragic accident, a terrible mistake made by a frightened man who did not know what to do. But the evidence did not support that story. Not even close. Inside Horner's delivery vehicle, investigators found something chilling: recordings. Images and audio captured within the van documented what truly happened after Athena was taken. Those recordings would later be played in a courtroom full of jurors, attorneys, family members, and reporters. And what they heard and saw shook the room to its core. The audio captured Athena's voice. She cried. She begged. She called out for her mother and pleaded to go home. At one point, the little girl asked a question that no child should ever have to ask. She wanted to know why this was happening to her. Horner's response, recorded for the world to eventually hear, was 4 words: "Because you are pretty." Several jurors wept openly as the recording played. The weight of those moments was impossible to escape. The medical examiner's findings removed any remaining doubt about the nature of the crime. The cause of Athena's death was determined to be a combination of blunt force trauma, suffocation, and strangulation. This was not an accident. This was not a moment of panic. This was a deliberate act carried out against a child who had done nothing wrong, a child who simply happened to be near a front door when a stranger arrived with a package. When the trial formally began, Tanner Horner stood before the court and pleaded guilty to capital murder. It was a significant moment, an acknowledgement of guilt that spared the family from having to endure a lengthy debate over the basic facts of what happened. But in Texas, a guilty plea to capital murder does not automatically determine the sentence. That decision, life in prison or death, still falls to the jury. And so the trial continued, not to determine whether Horner had committed the crime, but to determine what the rest of his life would look like because of it. Prosecutor James Stainton addressed the jury with clarity and conviction. He laid out the timeline, the evidence, and the lies. He told the court that Horner had told lie after lie after lie from the moment investigators began asking questions. The fabricated story about an accidental collision, the attempt to frame the events as a panic response, none of it held up. The recordings, the physical evidence, and the medical examiner's report all pointed to the same conclusion. This was premeditated, calculated, and cruel. The defense team faced an extraordinary challenge. They knew the evidence was devastating. In fact, they acknowledged it openly during their opening statements, describing the case against their client as overwhelming and terrible. They were not there to dispute what had happened. They were there to argue that Tanner Horner's life, despite everything, was worth sparing. To make that case, the defense presented a portrait of a man shaped by circumstances beyond his control. They told the jury that Horner's mother had consumed alcohol during her pregnancy, potentially affecting his development before he was even born. They argued that he had lived with multiple mental health conditions throughout his life, conditions that, in their view, contributed to the person he became. They also pointed to elevated levels of lead exposure during his childhood, a factor that medical experts have linked to impaired impulse control and decision-making in some individuals. It was a difficult argument to make, not because the facts were necessarily untrue, but because the jury had just listened to a 7-year-old girl crying for her mother on an audio recording. The defense was asking 12 people to weigh a lifetime of hardship against the deliberate taking of a child's life, and to conclude that the scales tipped toward mercy. They did not. After nearly a month of testimony, evidence, and deliberation, the jury delivered their answer: death. The panel concluded that Tanner Horner represented a continuing danger to society, that if given the opportunity, there was a probability he would commit violent acts again. They also determined that nothing in the circumstances of the crime, and nothing in Horner's background, was sufficient to justify a sentence of life in prison over the ultimate penalty. The decision was unanimous in its direction, even if it came with the quiet, heavy grief that these decisions always carry. When the sentence was read aloud in the courtroom, Tanner Horner did not flinch. He did not cry. He did not speak. According to those who watched the live proceedings, his face remained completely still, an absence of reaction that, in its own way, said everything. Outside the courtroom, the community of Paradise, Texas, and countless others who had followed the case processed the verdict with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that the legal process had run its course. Relief that a man who had committed an unthinkable act against a child would face the most serious consequence the justice system allows. And sorrow, deep, enduring sorrow, because no verdict changes the fact that Athena Strand is gone. She was 7 years old. She loved dolls. Her parents had ordered her a Christmas gift because they wanted to see her smile on Christmas morning. That gift arrived at the door, and the person who carried it took everything from a family that had done nothing to deserve it. The "You Can Be Anything" collection, that was the name on the box. You can be anything. It is a message of hope, of possibility, of the vast and open future that every child deserves to imagine for themselves. Athena never got to open that box. She never got to be anything more than what she already was: a daughter, a little girl, a child full of life in a quiet Texas town where nothing like this was ever supposed to happen. The trial of Tanner Horner is now closed. The legal chapter of this story has reached its end. But the story of Athena Strand, who she was, what was taken from her, and what her life meant to the people who loved her, that story does not end with a verdict. It does not end with a sentence. It lives on in the memory of a community that held its breath for 2 days, in the hearts of a family that will carry this loss forever, and in the minds of everyone who heard a little girl's voice on that recording and understood, in the most painful way possible, exactly what justice is supposed to mean. Cases involving children are always the hardest to process, not just for the families directly affected, but for society as a whole. There is something about the loss of a child that cuts through every barrier we build around ourselves. It doesn't matter where you live, what you believe, or how disconnected you feel from a small town in Texas. When a 7-year-old girl disappears on the day a Christmas gift arrives at her door, something inside every person who hears that story breaks a little. And that is precisely why cases like this must be told carefully. The details are painful. The evidence is harrowing. The audio recordings presented in that courtroom were described by those who heard them as some of the most difficult moments they had ever witnessed in a legal setting. Jurors who had committed to remaining composed found themselves unable to hold back tears. Attorneys who had spent years in courtrooms sat in silence as a child's voice filled the room. These are not abstract facts. These are real moments that real people lived through, and that Athena lived through alone, without her mother, without her family, in the back of a stranger's van on a November afternoon in Texas. The justice system, for all its imperfections, is designed to respond to moments exactly like this one. It is slow. It is procedural. It demands evidence, testimony, deliberation, and time. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, it arrives at a conclusion that reflects the true weight of what was lost. The jury in the Tanner Horner trial spent weeks absorbing information that no one should ever have to absorb, and they returned a verdict that said, clearly and without ambiguity, this matters. She mattered. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Cases like this are not easy to cover, and they are not easy to watch. But bearing witness to what happened to Athena Strand and to the long road toward accountability that followed is one of the ways we honor the lives of those who can no longer speak for themselves. If this video moved you, leave a like, share it with someone, and subscribe for more true crime coverage handled with the seriousness and respect these stories deserve. We will see you in the next one.